Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson, a Brit. Joining us again is the very, very charming Michael Gordon-Shapiro. Hello, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing just great, Nick. Great to be here on the show again.
Today we are going to discuss a film that has completely grabbed musical theatre fans by the nuts and won't let go. It's been nominated for 14 Academy Awards, which I believe is up there with, is it Titanic and other such amazing films? You hail from Los Angeles, don't you, my good friend?
I'm hailing from there right now.
We're talking, of course, about La La Land, the, I use the term loosely, new film musical that is out. You and I have both seen the film, albeit at different times in different countries. I saw it a week ago, so my memory of it is a bit weaker than yours, and you saw it yesterday, didn't you? So we're going to discuss this quite dividing film musical this week, aren't we?
Indeed.
Thoughts?
I think that some of the mania surrounding this film is because people are ready to fall in love with the idea of this movie. Everyone is really enthusiastic about the return of the film musical tradition, the kind of very romantic, flowing, musically effusive, slightly silly tradition hailing back to films like Singing in the Rain. I think people really want that to come back. And this film has tried to step up into that position and has tried to offer a modern spin on the classic film musical. I think people are so ready for that, then their enthusiasm has skyrocketed. And I think that's why we're seeing the Academy Award response and just the popular gushing over the movie itself.
They love it before they go in, and they go in wanting to love it, don't they?
In many cases, I think that's true. Speaking big picture wise, I think there is actually a lot to like about this film, and I'll even say there's a lot to love about it. I think its intentions are good, and the craftsmanship in several respects is excellent, and the performances are excellent across the board. I think there's a kind of disappointment that sets in when you realize that the film is falling short of its ambitions, that it sets out on a very noble mission and it doesn't really get there. And instead you have something, I think, more shallow and less satisfying than it could have been.
My response, and the response of my friend with whom I saw it, was it's just not good enough. For something that is wanting to be like West Side Story or 42nd Street or Singing in the Rain, it just doesn't have the wow factor. I want to get your perspective coming from Los Angeles, or La La Land as we call it, because the area was almost a character in itself.
In many senses, I think that's true. And I think if you're from Southern California and Los Angeles in particular, your enjoyment is boosted a little bit because you're familiar with a lot of the locations and just the nuances of the entertainment industry. I think if you have friends who are actors in film and TV, or if you're one of those yourself, you'll instantly click with some of the nuances of life auditioning and the particular places that you're driving, all those little slice of life details about LA. And those are, as you'd expect from a movie made in LA, very true to life.
It's been a week since I've seen the film, and every day since the week has gone past, I've disliked this film more and more and more. The tune I left humming was the Godfather theme. Did you get that?
There was certain similarity.
Or the Rainbow Connection from the Muppets.
I did notice that. I did remark it did sound a little bit like the Rainbow Connection. I forget exactly which tune, but there was something that made that connection for me.
It forgot it was a musical about 20 minutes in. And I sat there thinking this could be much better if it was actually done as a musical sequence, like the do we want to give away the film?
I was going to ask you the same question.
This is a difficult discussion to have, but there is a sequence towards the end which, if they had done it musically in the first place, it would have been a lot cleverer when it came round again.
I completely agree, and I think what you're touching upon was my main disappointment with the film.
Right, so let's say that there are spoilers in this episode. If you haven't seen La La Land, this has been a production of Musical Talk, copyright 2017, and we'll see you next week. Bye!
See you guys.
Yeah. Okay, if you have seen La La Land, my thoughts are with you, but we'll carry on with our dissection.
Or vivisection.
Yes.
I think the issue here is that the film never fully committed to the idea of being a film musical. And I absolutely agree that about an hour into it, I would periodically forget that what I was watching was supposed to be a musical. And to me, the reason is that key story moments happened outside of songs, whereas in a stage musical and some of the better film musicals, the big moments, the pivotal plot turns and the big character decisions happen through songs. Song is the medium of storytelling. Whereas in this movie, I think that was true for the first 20 minutes and stopped being true about when the two leads, when Sebastian and Mia finally hooked up romantically. I think from that point forward, the songs were essentially garnish. They were moments of reflection, or they were diegetic. So when the two of them sit at a piano and
our favorite word,
yeah, they were songs performed in the world of the story that other characters would hear in the normal course of life. So music in a club, or in the case of the two of them, when they were sitting down at Sebastian's piano and doing a little duet song about Los Angeles, and Mia keeps laughing in the middle of it, which reminds us that it's a diegetic song and it's not a musical song where you're directly communicating your feelings. And none of these really moved the story forward. They were often pleasant, or they were perhaps redundant. Someone was sad, so they would go to the pier and sing about how sad they were, but they didn't give us any new information. They didn't reveal any truths. They didn't move any. There were no decisions that I remember being made in songs. And I think that's a big distinction between book musicals and what was happening here and in the movie musical tradition in general.
So what's interesting about the creators for La La Land is the music is by Justin Hurwitz, and the lyricists for the film are Pasek and Paul, who are a Broadway self-enclosed kind of writing team. Why didn't they do it?
It's an interesting question, and as to why the music was written by person A versus person B, I think that's tied into the issue of convincing a studio to take a financial risk on a film of this
sort. It's all very ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is, that you have to sell the idea of a musical, whereas there was a period in Hollywood's history where film musicals were incredibly marketable and incredibly popular. But today it's a bit of an anachronism. So I suspect that in order to sell the idea, to drum up the millions and millions of dollars you need to get star talent and a production of this scope, you have to say, well, we're going to make the music connect with a contemporary audience as well as touch upon a musical tradition of yesteryear. So that may result in certain politics of who gets to write music and so forth.
The opening number, though it is completely pointless, I thought, was catchy and nice, but I had a real issue throughout the whole film of the vocals. They all sounded like they were being whispered in a studio.
To my ear, and to my eye, they looked like they were dubbed tracks. So they probably mimed singing them during the shoot and then overdubbed. They did ADR essentially and re-recorded it. It didn't look like a scenario like Les Miserables, where they believed they were recording on location, yes, and the actors were listening to reductions of the music in hidden headphones.
And also the actors were leading the orchestra as opposed to the entire song tracks leading the film sequence.
There was definitely not the kind of projection and engaging the audience that you would expect in a stage musical, to be sure. I think this is a film that really took advantage of close miking technology and decided to make that an artistic choice, to treat it essentially like an album recording, where the vocals can be very intimate and you can assume the audience is going to hear them regardless of the accompaniment density. So yes, there were definitely more nuanced pop-style vocals as opposed to the big, sing out Louise kind of approach.
Which doesn't make sense to me. If you're making a film as a love letter to the old-fashioned films of Hollywood, why do these modern recording techniques?
I think, again, it was an attempt to synthesize two traditions and to modernize the golden age of Hollywood film musicals and try to bring it into a new era. Musically, that means approaching certain genres, at least from a production standpoint, in a way that would be more familiar to modern audiences. Modern film audiences are probably not ardent theater goers, and they're not used to hearing a tenor belt at fortissimo. And they are used to listening to pop music, and that's recorded with a close mic in an isolated studio, and a singer can barely whisper and you can crank it all the way up and hear it. So I think that was the approach. I think that artistically it's a matter of taste. You might enjoy that. You might find it garish. I suspect you find it garish.
I just didn't find it style appropriate.
I'm inclined to sort of agree. I'm a little bit conservative in that regard. I thought Let It Go and Frozen felt suddenly stylistically inappropriate. So obviously that makes me out of touch.
Let it go as inappropriate in general. So
I didn't have a huge problem with that approach to production. I was more concerned about the functionality of the songs, almost more than the music and the delivery itself.
And that brings on to my next point. I didn't really think they were necessary. I thought it would have been a better film with songs in the diegetic sense.
Meaning you would rather have heard songs that were part of the universe?
Yes,
as opposed to
because in the jazz club or on the concert stage with John Legend, or as opposed to having the musical book moments for the first third of the film and then completely forgetting about them. Yes, we had a Rodgers and Hammerstein If I Loved You song. Yes, we had a sort of a tribute to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, even though it was terrible, in my opinion. I was hoping they would both fall off the edge of that.
Mulholland,
yeah, whatever. They just didn't seem to add much, but they didn't move the story forward, did they?
Generally speaking, I agree. I think that the opening 20 minutes or so of the film showed a lot of promise, in that it seemed like they were going for an approach where they were telling the story through songs. You did have the opening, I guess I wouldn't call it a happy villagers number, but kind of a disgruntled, quasi-happy, stuck-in-traffic villagers
Reminded
number.
me of Fame.
A little bit, yeah. I thought I liked that, though. I would say I loved the first 20 minutes up until the romantic connection was made between Sebastian and Mia. I loved the opening number. I thought it was very clever to set such a joyous moment in the middle of this frustrating traffic jam that is definitely familiar to Los Angeles natives. I liked the second song, the Persuasion song, the Come to the Party and Meet a Stranger in the Crowd. That was a good use of music to move the story forward. This was one of the rare cases where a song was functional, because we had Mia very reluctant to go to the party and her roommates persuaded her.
They were whispering so much you couldn't hear what they were saying.
They persuaded her subtly, but but if you removed that second song from the film, we would suddenly be at a party and we wouldn't know why. So we did have a purpose to that number. I would argue that the conditional love song, I think it was called A Waste of a Perfectly Good Evening, or something along those.
Describes my seeing the film.
Yeah. Wow, this is going to be. I'm clearly. I'm going to be the provider of emotional enthusiasm here. The third song.
Are you telling me the American is going to be the provider of enthusiasm, whilst the Brit just sits back and moans about everything?
Yes, I know you're half Dementor, but we will let a little bit of joy pass through the gates of dour cynicism, because I think the film does get partial credit in certain respects. I love the first 20 minutes. I really did. The party sequence where Sebastian was in an 80s cover band. Not just musically, I thought the opening of the film had a kind of romanticism to it. There was a sense of destiny. There was a sense of things propelling forwards. There was a romantic attraction that was very asymmetrical. There were a couple of really funny moments where they defied expectations. So when Mia is adoringly looking at Sebastian playing at the club, where he's just done this jazz solo that's got him fired, and she walks up to him and breathlessly says, "I heard you play," and he pushes her aside and walks out of the club. I thought that was very funny. I felt that was as much a tribute to the kind of romantic dynamic you'd get in a classic film musical as it was a poking fun of that tradition by thwarting our expectations. This part of the movie really worked for me up until the point where they made the romantic connection. At that moment, I think that's where I agree with you completely. I think from there on, I would just forget it was a musical from time to time.
Until we get to the audition song, which is the one I did like.
I agree. I think that was a return to the kind of music that we would expect to find in a musical, because the song performed a function. It was essentially a metaphor for a great pitch for a story. It let us experience that moment where Mia is convincing the people who are auditioning her that she's a good improvisational storyteller. And the music becomes the song where she's singing this anecdote and then generalizing it to a kind of ode to creative people. That song functions in the way we would expect it to. So I agree, that was a very strong second to last number.
And we also had a kind of Agnes de Mille inspired dream ballet, didn't we?
We did. And I think it's this is almost stumbling forward to another topic, which is naturalism versus romanticism in the story itself and how that story concludes. But to answer your question, I liked the number musically, and I did not like the fact that it was all a hypothetical dream in substitute for a final song.
Did you like the flying sequence in the planetarium?
I think it was charming. I liked the idea that I liked the setup for that moment where they're trying to watch a movie set at the planetarium, and the movie breaks down, and Mia says, "I've got a better idea," and suddenly they're pulling up to the planetarium, which is inexplicably open after hours, but
yes,
we can accept that.
And you can get in.
Right. So don't try that in real life, but we can accept that much as part of the romanticism of a musical. The moment itself was fun, but I'm not sure that it was the equivalent of the dance sequence in Beauty and the Beast, in that this romantic connection already existed, and this was embellishing a little bit. It was poeticizing it, but there were no surprises in that moment, and nothing, forgive the incredibly non-romantic language, nothing was accomplished from the standpoint of story in that moment. It was just fun and whimsical and a little la-di-da without having a lot of substance. What did you think?
It was very pretty. It reminded me of Moulin Rouge, if anything.
I think that's a good analogy there.
It's one of the images I remember, and that's all I have to say on that moment.
If you look at the structure of the film, you have an opening that seems like a musical. The songs are doing things, and the song density is pretty high. We don't have to wait very long between songs. At the ending, there's a little bit of bookend. I think it remembers it's a musical again, and hyper real things start happening again. We have a dream sequence. We have, as we talked about, this pitch of a storytelling experience that is done through song in a very non-literal way. And between these two bookends, we have what is essentially an above average, but a very conventional contemporary love story where work and romance conflict, and there are questions of artistic integrity versus selling out. And these are common enough themes, and the performance was great, and the themes are all admirable. We're all behind the idea of creative artists being true to themselves. But the style in between these two bookends was very naturalistic. It was very down to earth, very of reality, and the songs felt just like asides. And this is, as we both observed, this is where I would periodically forget that I was there to see a musical, and I thought I was just seeing another romantic comedy with a little bit of a dark edge to it.
But to me, the songs are part of Mia's imagination, and once she's in this relationship, she doesn't need the songs anymore because she has Sebastian for the music in her life. And when she no longer has Sebastian, the songs come back. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to come up with a reason as to why they made this dramatic choice to get rid of the songs for the bulk of the love story.
I disagree in your observation that Mia doesn't need the songs once she's in the relationship.
Right.
I think there were a number of opportunities for music that were not, the movie did not avail itself, of which the movie did not avail itself. For example, the moment where Sebastian has come back from tour, where he's essentially sold out,
yes,
and joined this very pop jazz fusion kind of band, and he's psychologically sold out. He's now convinced himself this is the reality of his life. His dreams were kind of foolish, and we see the contrast between Mia, who has become increasingly idealistic and devoted to her seemingly impractical goal to be a playwright, and Sebastian, who started out being very idealistic and in fact was the one who engaged her idealism. And now they're kind of at a crossroads where they're both going in different directions on the idealism scale. And there's a real conflict there, which is phenomenally well emoted from a performance standpoint. There absolutely could have been a song there. I think that would have been a great moment for music, because that would have been an opportunity for a duet or a conflict song or something. But instead we had a very dry, a very effusive performance, but a non-musical one. So I think there were a couple of moments like that during the middle where there really could have been songs that functioned, but they certainly weren't there.
And maybe they were written and not used. We don't know. Be interesting to find out.
I'm inclined to think that, or this is complete speculation, but I don't know that the creative team's hearts were 100% behind doing this as a musical. I think they wanted to tell a naturalistic story, and they musicalized it as much as they could by addressing the optimistic parts of that story, such as the opening and, in a very speculative what if could have been kind of way, the ending. But the mechanics of the story in the middle, where we have this changing of idealism between the two characters and ultimately their alienation from each other, that's not really musical theater style storytelling. It's in a musical, I think you normally, at least in a classical musical or a classic film musical, you expect characters to make decisions, and they're either good decisions or they're terrible decisions. But whatever decisions they make, their fates are impacted as a result. The direction of their life is sent down path A versus path B because they sang this big soliloquy and they said, okay, I'm going to go murder this man and take his money so I can support my pregnant wife, or some moment like that. And here, the fate of the relationship came down to this very muted discussion where they said, gee, we're both really busy. I guess we'll see what happens. That is a very naturalistic moment. That's a very contemporary storytelling moment.
And it's also a very realistic look at a relationship, isn't it?
But notice that they split the difference between both approaches, because the characters did go for their dreams, and on a career level, they were absolutely fulfilled. Mia took a chance, and she succeeded because she took that chance. Sebastian was an active participant in her dream because he has to convince her to take that audition, whereas she was ready to blow it off. When it comes to the actual romance, it's very naturalistic. Nothing about their ideals or goals or wants impacted how they ended up romantically. So in that respect, as a romance, it wasn't very much like a musical at all.
Jazz is a very, very big part of this film, in the sort of in the musical styling, but more so in the diegetic song or music moments within the film, because Sebastian plays a jazz pianist, and Ryan Gosling, playing Sebastian, learnt how to play the piano, or learnt for 6 months to learn how to play the stuff in the film, quite successfully, I thought. There was, however, the friend I saw got very annoyed at this moment, the jazz monologue, saying it's dying out and all this kind of stuff. With people like Postmodern Jukebox and all this, the retro stuff being very popular, which is what the film is about in a way, does the film agree with itself?
Well, it's an interesting question, especially when you consider the fact that Sebastian makes a strong case for pure jazz. He joins a group that sort of bastardizes jazz with contemporary pop, and we are meant to understand that is him selling out. Yeah. Even though I actually liked that music better than his jazz, but
I want that keyboard he was playing. It's just a sheet.
Oh, that's the Rolly. That's actually a fairly recent launch. You can get that for a couple of grand. That's a real thing. But the issue here is that Sebastian, our main character, absolutely identifies with traditional jazz, and that's what he's doing at the end of the show. And that shows us that he's achieved his dream. He got the thing he wanted, and that's great. But the actual score of the movie is at best jazz influenced, in the same way that certain show tunes from the middle of the last century were using jazz instrumentation. But I think the score to the film, and specifically the songs he sings, are not really traditional jazz at all. So there's a little disconnect between the stated goals of the character and how the character is musicalized and how he connects to us musically.
Well, the opening is kind of Latin-y, isn't it? It's the one song I could nail down and say that is a kind of a pastiche.
Kind of a hybrid pastiche of a couple of styles.
Yeah.
I think that opening number, which I loved, by the way, that was the filmmakers and the creative team saying, this is a tip of the hat to traditional film musicals that are drawing from Broadway and the musical language of the mid-20th century. That felt very retro to me, and it was of several worlds musically at the same time, in the exact same way you'd expect to find in a classic golden era Broadway musical. So that was coherent to me. I would not call that jazz so much as jazz. It was jazz-ish.
And it also never came back.
Other than the moments of diegetic jazz, which felt legit, I don't think we had a lot of jazz influence in the score after that. My memory is not perfect, so I may be wrong there.
You've got a waltz, which he plays ad nauseum, but which comes from his mind, which is the Godfather theme. I wish they got, and we'll talk about the cast as well, but I wish they got a real musical theatre composer to do it.
It's interesting that the leitmotif for their romance, the theme you referred, was strictly instrumental, right? Did we ever hear a song version of that theme, or was it just something?
I think he or she whistles it, or he made that might have been what he was singing walking at the pier. Do you remember?
I mean, he did have a song at the pier.
It was about 20 seconds long, I think.
I don't think we ever heard that tune, that theme that embodies their relationship, as a song with lyrics.
No.
Do you remember ever hearing that?
No.
It's very telling that the musical heart of the film isn't a song; it's underscore. And I think that's kind of a symptom of the fact that they didn't go whole hog with making this a musical. because you would expect there to be some kind of recurring lyric, like I had a dream from Gypsy or whatever, something we could hang on to, and not just something for the film score fans to say, I heard that theme before, I recognize that is associated with their romantic connection. It was a little too subdued.
But maybe it's because it's his personality. The character doesn't sing, he plays piano, so that's his way of communicating through music.
He does sing occasionally in a similar subdued way. We have the song on the pier, and we have the duet where they're singing a kind of nebulous ode to Los Angeles, if memory serves. But think of the presentation of that duet at the piano. It felt like two characters just sitting down and goofing off at the piano rather than pouring their hearts out to each other or to us, the audience. And the fact that they had Mia kind of laugh during that song grounded it in reality. It was just two people sitting at the piano goofing off. And it didn't have that. It didn't have the quality that songs and musicals do, where it takes us out of the literal moment and becomes a conduit to how they feel in a very direct way. It really could have been in a non-musical movie.
We started off this discussion by saying you think the film is getting lots of hype and attention because
we are, as a culture, I think we have a yearning to return to the era of film musicals and maybe musicals generally.
So I'd like to put another layer onto that beautiful cake and say, do we think, especially at this time of our lives in America, do you think this kind of whimsical retro look at the world is in bigger demand than ever?
Well, I'm going to have to crack open a can of speculation because I'm not a licensed cultural anthropologist, so I'm not authorized to speak on the subject, but I think when times are stressful, people tend to lean towards sincerity. I think just as a generalization, it's not an accident that the most over-the-top romantic era of Broadway well, that's not entirely true, but certainly Broadway film musicals happened after World War II. And
the Depression.
Exactly. We all needed a good laugh.
And also the most funny stage musicals of recent times was after 9/11.
That's an interesting observation, and I'd be willing to chalk it up to the same exact phenomenon. You could even say that culturally we tend to cycle back and forth between realism and hyperrealism. That if you think of movies in the 70s until Star Wars, everything was dark and gritty. Suddenly Star Wars ushered in this new era of everything being over the top. You might say that we're ready for this kind of heart-on-sleeve musical, both on stage and in the cinema. But as this film showed, I don't know that Hollywood yet, I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but this film did not go the whole way in terms of the heart on sleeve quality because the romance was so bittersweet. And again, it wasn't because somebody made a big decision. It was just that's how things turned out. Oh, well, the romance didn't work and they both feel kind of bad about it. That's a very naturalistic approach to storytelling.
I think Damien Chazelle, who wrote the film, is trying to make a bit of a point that relationships in general suck. Yes.
The old Woody Allen line, we need the eggs. Their relationships are irrational and terrible, yet we keep going to them. That opinion doesn't really resonate with me personally, and I'm hoping we will see something more akin to Moulin Rouge, where romance was portrayed as wonderful but doomed by external circumstances and bad decision making. And that's
Romeo and Juliet.
Traditional. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that kind of doomed romance I can get behind because at least it was somebody's fault. Somebody lacked faith or lacked courage, or they just made a bad judgment call. It wasn't just Romeo and Juliet didn't just sit down and say, well, our families really don't like each other. We'll see how this works out. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. And that moment really, in La La Land, really disappointed me. So I'm hoping we do return to a more optimistic view of romance, even if it results in a pile of corpses.
What did you think of Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling?
I thought they were strong points for the film. They were real assets. I think their ability to express themselves emotionally made up for the deficiencies in the musical storytelling in many cases. An example being the conditional love song on Mulholland, where they were doing their tap dance routine. I didn't think that song, the Waste of a Beautiful Evening song, really sold us on the idea that those two characters saw anything.
It's actually called A Lovely Night, if you want to know.
Lovely Night, yeah. Yes. A waste of a lovely night. I was not convinced by that song that those two characters had any chemistry, because at the moment they were borderline hostile. But the performances subsequent to that moment did sell the romance. So I think the actors managed to make up for some of the duties that the music left behind.
Is that duties or duties?
Duties, obligations.
Or duties. I think this is going to be on Broadway within the next 3 years.
It's an interesting question. I wouldn't doubt it. From a business standpoint, it does seem to make sense. I think there would have to be substantial repurposing of the film and rewriting of the film to make it work on stage. And one reason is stage does not have the benefit of the camera.
Or being Hollywood.
That's true. You don't have the locations and the settings. But even that aside, even if you just have a giant cardboard Hollywood sign that gets rolled out for 15 seconds and rolled off stage, think of the role that the camera played in this movie to convince us of the emotional states of the characters.
And also to give us the alternative realities as well.
That's true, the dream sequence. What I was thinking specifically of is at the opening when Mia is working as a barista on the Warner lot in a coffee shop. And I think it's Halle Berry or some celebrity walks in. And the camera does a close-up shot on her face, which is when she sees a Hollywood star. And her face lights up and shows this combination of admiration and wistfulness and yearning. And the character, is it Emma Stone? She manages to convey that to us facially instantly. We immediately know who she is, we know who she wants, and we like her. And that's just from one shot on her face. And you can do that in film because you have the camera, which can direct your attention to a particular thing and zoom in really close to that thing so you really get a sense of what it is. And I think that's part of why the movie had no "I want" song. There was no point where Mia turned to us and said, "I would like to be an actress, and I will detail my vision in the following number." And I don't think the film necessarily needed that because the camera could tell us who that character was.
Whereas a stage show, you can imagine her standing in the coffee shop doing the same thing day by day until the star walks in. She sings of her wanting to be a star. That is an "I want" song structure for that moment.
Exactly. And I think you would have to rewrite this film to take advantage of moments like that in order to convey the characters to us.
And it just makes me wish that the film did it in the first place.
It's true. They could have put an "I want" song in there despite the fact that the camera was at their disposal. And I missed it a little bit.
Would you see it again?
I would see it again, but mostly to appreciate the craftsmanship and the performances and maybe to give the film a second shot. I don't want to see it again in a burning desire to see the film again, not at the moment. How about you? Well, I think that ship has sailed for you.
I would see it again, but I wouldn't pay £15 to see it in the cinema again.
You'd want to refine your hate for free.
Yes, and I want to wait also for my hate to dwindle a bit. It's certainly discussing it with you has enlightened my mood a bit, because the only people I speak to hate it or haven't seen it. But it certainly has divided opinions a lot, hasn't it?
It does. And I think the advantage to a movie like this is that it once again draws musicals into the forefront of popular focus, even if it's just an opportunity for people who hate musicals to reiterate the fact that they hate musicals. I think it's better to have the art form front and center and the subject of discussion and even controversy than for it to recede and disappear like jazz did in the movie. So I'm grateful to it for that reason, in the same sense that I'm grateful to High School Musical and the Buffy musical episode and Frozen, just because they all kept the discussion about musical theater current.
In the next couple of weeks on Musical Talk, we are going to be dissecting the history of the Hollywood musical, going way back to where it started, and Tonya and I will be picking it apart and seeing what trends we found and going through the various plot points of the Hollywood musical's life story. Michael Gordon Shapiro, thank you very, very much for joining me on Musical Talk. You kind of said in last week's episode a real Brit will be on it, which is true, but also you are back, which is very nice as well.
That's the best of both worlds. We're a little musical UN here.
Exactly. Do go and see La La Land if you haven't seen it. I think it'll win some Oscars. Which ones do you think it'll clean up?
I can't remember how they're subdividing music these days. In the past, sometimes they've mushed together best score and best song, and then they split it up again. And
so score is separate, and he's up for 2 songs. I thought Alan Menken put a stop to that. I don't know.
Right. Well, he was the cause of a lot of grumbling, I know, back in the day. I think this is going to clean up at the Oscars just on the energy of enthusiasm for it. And again, the phenomenon we talked about at the very beginning of today's episode, which is people want to love this film. And I think, by golly, they're going to do it.
When I said to Michael this is going to be an entire episode, he went, What? We can talk about La La Land for an hour? No, but we can talk about it for 50 minutes, which is what we've just done. So, Michael, thank you very much again for joining me on Musical Talk.
It was a pleasure as always. Thanks for inviting me.
This episode of Musical Talk was presented by Nick Hudson and Michael Gordon Shapiro and edited by Nick Hudson. For more information, you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/musicaltalk, on Facebook at facebook.com/musicaltalk, or on our website at musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com. Copyright Musical Talk 2016.